So today we're really going to just talk for 30 quick minutes about promoting well-being at work. And well-being is really so much more than encouraging employees to take care of themselves physically or exercise or, take breaks or, do yoga in the office. And so as we start to transition back, we're thinking about, how do we really promote that well-being? How do we think about what builds well-being in our office, and how do we help our employees and really ourselves transition? So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you right now. All right. So this is just a quick little sheet. I'm not going to go through a lot of slides today. I have two quick slides that I'll share at the end, and if you are welcome to use them. They have embedded links with some different kind of resource and exercises as we go through. But what we'll talk about first is what builds well-being at work. What are those kind of fundamental underpinnings, and then we'll talk about the three kind of T's of positive transition: transparency, trust, and tell it like it is. And then we'll talk about some real practical ways of using these kind of strategies in a real world setting, thinking about, what do you say? How do you say it? What do you do to kind of help your team and really also yourself transition? So to start out with thinking about what builds well-being at work, there's a lot of different frameworks that are kind of in this organizational psychology and well-being psychology field. But this is probably one of the simplest and the most common ones, and it is PERMA. And you can see in this little diagram on the right corner that you're looking at positive emotion, engagement, positive relationships, meaning, and achievement. And that's sort of what's the general consensus that in terms of what builds well-being. That's sort of what the research shows. And so it's not just happiness sort of in a kind of the way you might think of someone who is exuberant or joyful, but it's really in sort of what makes people be satisfied with what their life is. And the one thing that you might notice that's missing from this is kind of physical and mental health. That's a big thing that's missing. So I always put it in the middle as sort of the underpinning. And what we're basically saying here is obviously you sort of need physical and mental health to be able to kind of get to these other pieces of that kind of PERMA framework, of that PERMA hierarchy, and that physical and mental health are kind of in service of these other pieces. So as we're thinking about, okay, what are we going to do to help our employees? What are we going to do to help ourselves? We're thinking about what are the things that we can do to boost these positive emotions, the sense of engagement, positive relationships, meaning, and achievement. So as we think about transition, and coming back to the office, there's all of these different kind of pieces of it. And statistically speaking, in all of the research that's being done on what employees want, they generally do not want to come back to the office full time, or at least that's the sense now. There's been a real range of kind of what the percentages are, but that's the vast majority. So part of creating that well-being is also thinking about how do we make that transition smooth? How do we increase all of these kind of pieces of PERMA to sort of build that positive outlook, that focus on really easing and maximizing, sort of not just making it less painful, but actually making it good. So those three T's of positive transition, as I think about them anyway, are transparency, trust, and tell it like it is. And the transparency piece in the work that I do with organizations is really that people want to know what's happening. They want to know what the plan is. They need communication. They want to hear what's going on. So that communication is important. And then the other piece of, even if that communication is, we don't know exactly what's happening, but this is what we're working on. So even if it even if it's a bit vague. And then the other piece of transparency is being transparent about what you're doing. What are the measures that we're taking to make you safe? What are the measures that we're taking to make this transition positive? And really also, which we'll get to this a little more when it comes to tell it like it is, what are the reasons that we're coming back? So what are we doing? Why are we doing this, right? And there's a bit of a misconception that people are more efficient at home. Obviously, people want to stay home. And so sometimes we really need that. Part of that transparency is really digging into those details of why are we coming back? And the answer of this is just out of my hands, or this is not, or this is just something we have to do, is not a particularly satisfying answer. It doesn't sort of increase the buy-in, the engagement from the employee. So really thinking about and being prepared with statistics and research on why we're coming back, what it means to the team from a cohesivity perspective, and also what it means from a productivity perspective and a company perspective. So both the sort of business case and the personal case for sort of why are we coming back to the office. And then the second piece of this is really trust. So that trust piece is looking at, it's tough. It's hard to build trust. It takes time. So giving people that time, they're not going to necessarily come back to the office through full of excitement and joy. They're going to be reluctant. And so really thinking about planning that time to return, building that trust that both sort of what you said that you were going to do is being done, and that transition is not abrupt. And the second piece of that trust piece is giving people sort of opportunities to speak, opportunities to contribute, and which means that, as the team leader, you are really putting yourself in a position to listen. And so, there's that transparency piece, that's communication. And then there's this trust piece, which is probably more listening, and listening in a meaningful way. So, and then as part of this, you're kind of working to get alignment sort of across the company. And that can really be done in small ways. So that we'll talk a little bit about this a little bit more when we talk about practical tips. But what we're really thinking about here are constructive ways to build alignment. So what are we going to do together to make this helpful, and giving people a chance to contribute in that way, as opposed to just sort of exercising their concerns or venting. And then the final piece is telling like it is. So finding that hard data on why this transition is happening. Why are we doing this? So when we're, depending on what your area is, what you're focusing on, if you're in a kind of an innovation space, we're talking about, creativity and team building and idea generation, and all of the things that statistics have shown have diminished as part of this. So giving that real hard data and showing that you're kind of balancing company needs with employee needs as well. So build those kind of employee-centric return to work plans as you're also thinking about what this means for the organization, and understanding that the pandemic has changed, maybe at least for some people, what employees view as sort of their optimal work-life balance and what that means for them. So let's just take a minute and we'll take a break and ask for questions if there are any, and I'll kind of move through this. Okay, no questions it looks like, so we'll keep going. So this is the part that I really like about this, practical tips. What does it mean, how to do this? It's easy, super easy to say, build trust. It's super easy to say, be transparent. these things are obviously a lot harder to do. So what are the practical tips for doing this? And the first one, and I think maybe the best one, is prep your answers. Plan your answers to those tough questions so that you have them handy. So understand what it is that your employees want to know. Why are we coming back? Why can't I stay working from home? Plan those answers, have your statistics ready, have your argument ready, have your plan ready so that you're not on the defensive and that you can really sell this to your employees as a positive way to transition. And focus on what you're building. So allow yourself, it's a lot easier to allow yourself to answer in a constructive way when you already know what you're going to say and you can frame it in that most positive way. So the second piece is one I really like. It's promoting positive sharing. This one I think is critical. There is, I think, among most people that I've met, a misconception that complaining and venting makes you feel better. For the most part, complaining and venting does not actually promote well-being. It does not actually kind of lead you to feel better, to feel good. It tends to reinforce those negative mindsets. So while we want to have a place to share, we also want to really guide that sharing to be in service of the constructive ideas. So giving that framework for people to share can be two things. There can be a social piece to it. One can be sort of an event like, having people get together to share stories about sort of funny things that happen in their work from home scenario, maybe bringing photos or putting it onto a bulletin board. And then the second piece of it is that constructive piece, sort of building a way for people to contribute to what's going to happen in that back to office setting around a framework of being constructive. So it's really an emceed type event. It's moderated by someone who's going to be able to sweep that attention and that focus back to what we're doing. Okay, we are getting a little off track here, kind of complaining about what this is look like. Let's kind of reframe this and think about, okay, what are the things that we can do to make this as good as possible? And kind of related to that is bring the joy, right? That your team is going to key off you. So the more you're prepared, the more you're promoting positivity is great, but they're also going to look at you and look to you to kind of key off of. So you're managing that mindset. You're managing your own mindset about how you're thinking about this and kind of forcing or encouraging yourself to go back to those positive things about being in the office. And then when all else fails, focus on your own short-term strategies when things get frustrating, and obviously encouraging employees to focus on these strategies as well. So, these preparation, promoting positive sharing, mindset issues, these are long-term strategies. These are kind of comprehensive things to make things better. But there's also just really these short-term strategies that make that in the moment conflict, that make that in the moment answer to a tough question, that make that in the moment stress hard. So as you're thinking about coming back to pause, breathe, release the tension in your body, and give yourself a little bit of a break. So for folks who have attended any of my sessions before, and my area of expertise is really in sort of mindset and managing stress. And when we're thinking about what our body's doing and how our nervous system is responding, what we want to be doing is generally slowing down and deepening the breath, softening the muscles in the body, releasing tension, because as you do that, your brain is going to get a signal from your body, so through your autonomic nervous system, that you're not in danger, that you're not under attack. So you want to be sending that signal as much as possible. To the extent that you can do that, you're going to allow that kind of front part of the brain, the thinking, reasoning part of the brain, that's not going to fly off the handle, that is not going to panic, that is going to be able to handle questions in a rational way. That front part of the brain is going to be able to be operational because your brain is not in that fight or flight response. So that's all we're doing here: pausing, breathing, releasing. And so that's kind of the general strategy. If you are interested in learning more about any of these topics, there is a lot that's out there. There's a great book called Life is in the Transitions about kind of ways of approaching transition in a positive way. It's super data research heavy by Bruce Feiler. I highly recommend it. There is another TED Talk, which I think for everybody in a type A program, it's called How to Make Stress Your Friend by Kelly McGonigal. She's also written a great book called The Upside of Stress, which I think is super hopeful for people who are in a intense job, because it really goes to the point of how we respond to stress is what matters. It's not actually, stress in and of itself is not necessarily physically damaging to us. It's when we respond to stress in kind of an out of control or negative way that we sort of start to really see some of those physical and psychological negatives that go along with it. And then the last one is a podcast by Adam Grant, who's an organizational psychologist at Wharton. Super great in a lot of ways, but I predict that there will be a work-life podcast episode about transitioning back to the office, and I can almost guarantee that it will be fabulous. But there's a lot of other content in there that is that's really great. So I'm getting a question right now, so I'm going to go ahead and just pull up that question. Hopefully. You can't actually, all right, I might need to stop the screen sharing to get the question. Oh yeah. Okay, so here is the question that I received. What different things do you think people want from their work post-COVID? All right, so this is a good question. And in terms of what I see and what I hear from the companies and the law firms and the employees that I work with, it's really wide ranging. And that's an annoying answer, I know, and it makes it a little bit difficult to manage. But what I think people want is a little bit more flexibility. So in the research that I've seen, the surveys that have been done, employees don't necessarily object to going back into the office kind of full stop, but their ideal situation might be that they go into the office 3 days a week, or that they go into the office 2 days a week. That may be not practical for for many teams and for many organizations, and it may not even be the best thing overall. So, and the other thing I think to understand in this is that change is hard for everyone. So we had this big change going into COVID. We're going to have this change and this adjustment going out. So what employees may want may change over the course of the transition. And so making that transition experience more positive is, I think, really important. The final thing that I will say that I hear almost without exception is that people and the employees want communication. They want a clear understanding of what's happening, and they want communication about a plan. So that's what I've seen the most. That's what I hear the most. And the places where I talk to people where they seem to be kind of struggling more, maybe places where they're either unable or they haven't really communicated sort of what that plan is or how they're going to make that transition. And sometimes that's unavoidable. But that's sort of the ideal session. So we have a few minutes left. If anybody has any questions, I'm happy to take them. And if we don't have any questions, I'm going to do a little exercise at the end. I always finish with something that is kind of calming and relaxing. So if this is not your thing, you can feel free to log off, but I'd love it if you'd stay and join me. I'll keep an eye out for any questions that are there. And I will otherwise go ahead and feel free to kind of sit back in your chair, get comfortable. This isn't going to be anything fancy or scary. We're just going to be really focusing on relaxing our bodies, relaxing our breath, kind of turning off that sympathetic nervous system, turning on that parasympathetic nervous system so that the rest of the day we can really be open and able to kind of receive information, maybe without our brain going, into that fight or flight mode. So if it's comfortable for you, you can sit back in your chair. You can go ahead and let your body really be supported by your chair. And then go ahead and let your shoulders kind of drop away from the ears. If it's comfortable, you can close your eyes and do that. And then we're going to really go ahead and then just laser focus our attention right into the center of our body. So right where your heart and lungs and your core are. And then we're just going to notice just for a minute, just a couple of seconds, what's going on there. Are you breathing fast or slow? Are you breathing deep or shallow? And then go ahead and start to slow down and deepen the breath. If it works for you, you can find that slow, steady inhale on a count of 4. And then slow, steady exhale on that same count of 4. With control on the inhale. And then with control on that exhale. So remember, it's totally normal. Your brain might wander off to whatever you're doing next, something that's on your to-do list. Totally fine. It's all part of this practice. You're just going to sweep that attention back around to the breath. Pick up wherever you left off. Find that slow, deep breath. Maybe imagine and visualize what's happening in your body. So noticing that as you are able to take those slow, deep breaths, your diaphragm is moving more fully up and down. Your lungs are expanding further. And if you're not already doing it, maybe thinking about allowing your abdomen to expand as you inhale as well. So a little bit counterintuitive sometimes, but you're letting that abdomen expand so that you can get that diaphragmatic breathing going a little bit more, getting those full deep breaths. Remembering that as you get that diaphragmatic breathing going, as you slow down and deepen your breath, you're kind of zooming right into that autonomic nervous system, turning off that fight or flight response, turning on that rest and relax and reasoning response. And then keeping your attention within the frame of your body, but letting it move away from the center of your body and just start to scan through your body. So as you do that, we're kind of starting right at the top of your head and then moving down. And today, as we scan, all we're doing is thinking about softening, releasing the muscles. So progressive muscle relaxation has a similar effect on the nervous system, a similar effect on the brain, operationally a little bit different. But as you relax those muscles, as you release and soften and unclench, you're sending that signal to the brain that you're not in danger. So maybe noticing places where you might have tension if you're a jaw clencher. Maybe allow a little bit of separation between the teeth. Allow the muscles in the face to soften, remembering that your body and your brain are going to follow your face. If you've drawn your shoulders up by your ears, maybe let those shoulders settle down and away. Let them be nice and heavy. If you're scrunching your hands up or scrunching your toes in your shoes, maybe letting everything soften and loosen. As you start to let that sensation of softness kind of drift down the body, remembering we're not beating ourselves up here. If we find that our muscles get tight again, just send that signal, brain to body, soften, loosen, ease up, letting yourself sink a little bit deeper into the support of your chair. And then when you're ready, you can go ahead and check in with that breath one more time. Just notice where it is right now. Maybe notice what your heart rate is doing. Noticing what your respiratory rate is doing. We give the back of the neck a little stretch. Bring your chin down to your collarbone, letting the back of the neck stretch out from mid-back all the way to the top of the base of the skull. And then lift right on up, kind of shake it out. Take a couple of deep breaths. And then that is it for me today. So nice to see you all. I hope you have a great rest of your day.